Welcome to our first lesson for our short story unit. So overall in this unit, we're going to be looking more closely at the elements of short story. And our learning goal is at the end of this unit, students will be able to identify and understand the importance of different elements of short stories, including plot, settings, character, conflict, and point of view. Students will then apply their learning by writing a short story including all of the elements studied. So we'll go into more detail about what your final assignments will be later on. Right now, we want to focus on the elements of short story and what is a short story. So this definition comes from Wikipedia, as you can see it referenced in the bottom. So a short story is a brief work of literature, usually written in narrative prose, emerging from earlier storytelling traditions in the 17th century. The short story has grown to encompass a body of work so diverse as to defy easy characterization. That was a lot to take in, so let's take a look at it again, broken down in more accessible language. So, a short story is a brief work of literature, so a piece of writing, usually written in narrative prose. And those are essentially a form of writing that tells a story through actions. So when we're looking at a short story, a piece of writing, it is going to be told through actions. Emerging from earlier storytelling traditions in the 17th century, so we know that it's an old tradition and it comes from oral storytelling. So back in the day when people used to kind of sit around the campfire and tell stories, that's kind of where short stories got their start. The short story has grown to encompass a body of work so diverse. So a body of work being there are a lot of different kinds of short stories, and they are so diverse as to defy easy characterization. So that means it was hard to kind of put them in a certain category, so they eventually got a category of their own. Our short story study is going to take place using the book Give Me Shelter. So as a class, we will be reading short stories taken from Give Me Shelter, stories about children who seek asylum. So each night you will watch a short video about an element of short story, then we will explore that element through the reading of a short story from this collection. So basically what we're doing is something called the flipped classroom. So every night or every other night, you will have a video to watch that deals with kind of the theory. So we're going to be looking at the elements of short story in a video the night before. Then you'll come to class and we'll kind of unpack and analyze and look more deeply at that element of short story as it appears in a short story from this. The different elements of short story that we're going to be looking at are plot, setting and mood, character, point of view, and conflict. So in this first lesson, we're going to focus more specifically on plot. So plot is the sequence of events that make up the story. So basically, it's the scheme, the graph that the story follows. So you'll see very often it put on what's called a graph, where you see kind of it starts at the bottom, goes up, there's a peak, and then it falls to the end. So these 5 parts are 1 in green, the exposition, 2 in yellow, the rising action, 3 in red, the climax, 4 in purple, the falling action, and 5 in blue, the resolution or denouement. Breaking down the story steps. So we have all these steps, but what do they mean? So the first step you'll see if you look to the left, these are the handouts that we're going to be using in class. So number 1 is the exposition. And the exposition introduces the characters and the setting, so the time and place of the story. So basically this is the introduction. This is where the author is setting up the story and giving us an idea of what is about to happen. Number 2 wasn't included on the simplified graph we looked at, and it is where the conflict is introduced. So it's sometimes called the inciting incident, and it's when the conflict of the story begins. It's really important to know that all short stories have conflict. All stories have conflict. They wouldn't be a story, or they wouldn't be an interesting story anyway without conflict. So number 2 is that first moment where things might start to go wrong or we see a problem arise. Numbers 3, 4, and 5 are the rising action. So these are the steps or problems leading up to the climax. The suspense and conflict increase with the incline. So you'll see that 3, 4, and 5 are kind of going up the scale. That means that each bit of rising action is getting more intense than the last. And the rising action leads up to the climax. And the climax is the highest point of suspense or the turning point of the story. So this is where the reader wonders what will happen next. If you ever catch yourself gasping while you're reading a story and wondering, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? You're probably at the climax. Number 7, very similar to the rising action, but on the opposite side, is the falling action. And these are the events that happen after the climax that lead to the resolution. So the conflict begins to be resolved in the falling action. Number 8, again, not mentioned in our simple plot graph, but still good to take note of, is the moment of final suspense. And this is the last moment of conflict in the story. So this is kind of that last little bit where the problem is still there right before it gets resolved. And we end up at number 9, which is the resolution or denouement. And this is the outcome of the story, how the story ends, and how the characters have changed. So it's really important to note that in the end of the story, the characters should have changed somehow. Because of the conflict in the story, something happened, the characters develop, they change, maybe they learn something new. So in order to further our study of plot, in class tomorrow, we will be watching 2 Pixar shorts and identifying their sequence of events using the handouts that we looked at on the last 2 slides. If you'd like to get a head start, which is a really good idea, you can watch them now by staying tuned to my YouTube channel. So when you come to class tomorrow, we will watch the shorts and we will go over and identify the different parts. We'll work alone, we'll work in groups, we'll work together, and we'll make sure that we all know how to identify the plot graph of a short story. So good luck, and always remember when you're watching these videos, if you need to watch it again, go for it. If you need to pause it, if you need to take notes, do what you have to do. And if you ever have any questions, make sure you write them down as you're watching and ask them in class the next day. If you're too scared to ask in front of everyone, no worries. Come find me at some point and I will do my best to give you an answer. And I will see you all tomorrow.